Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to CollinsWoerman's A to Z of Landing a Job. We're going to be focused on interviewing today. I am Talia Olson. I have been at CollinsWoerman for about 7 years, been with the recruitment team for about 5 or 6 years. We've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews. We're by no means experts, but we have a lot of insight, and we hope that this can help you a little bit in your future of interviewing and landing the job you want. I am getting a little help from a colleague, Andy Morrison.
So I've been at CollinsWoerman for quite some time, and I've been on the recruitment team for about 10 years. I really enjoy getting to meet all the fresh faces that are coming out of college, and hopefully we can give you guys some good tips today.
Thanks, Andy. So we're going to be looking at in-person interviews to start with, virtual interviews, asking questions, and then some general interviewing tips, and we'll have an answer at the end. If you have any questions during it, just please submit your notes. We'll get going. Oops. So how to ace an in-person interview. There's some things you definitely need to do ahead of time that are pretty critical. Have copies of everything. Even if you decide to use a tablet, I would always have copies. You don't want your technology to fail, and it's safer to have backup in that situation. Always have questions prepared, always. Even if it's your third interview, it doesn't matter. Showing that you're engaged, having those questions prepared ahead of time is important. Do your homework on the company. Know who you're walking into, and take some notes on the research that you do. Run through those notes before you go to your interview so you can recollect what that company does, and so that there's no faux pas in the interview and you accidentally talk about a different firm. Doesn't look well. Attire. Dress for the job you want. This should be pretty straightforward. Professional attire is always necessary in those situations. Consider how you present your content.
Yeah, we've seen, part of the joy being on this team, the recruitment team here, is, we get to see a lot of great information coming out of kids in schools. And it's one thing we've learned is a lot of people try to do something really original and really interesting to kind of present their portfolios. And I would say about 95% of the time it doesn't work. We've seen origami, pop-ups, all sorts of these crazy ideas that are really fun, but a lot of times they just don't work in an interview setting. So my advice to people is always, unless you're 110% sure that your portfolio delivery method is going to work, it's just better to just stick with the old 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17. Have a couple copies you can pass off. I think people do themselves a disservice when they try to get really cute with how they present stuff. And
then one more thing that's really important to practice ahead of time is your handshake. Have a solid handshake, not too firm, but not too light. And I would honestly ask a family member, a friend, to practice your handshake. First, we know first impressions are important, and if it's the job you want, I would go to the lengths of practicing your handshake. Have someone give you a little bit of constructive criticism. Every little bit helps. So right before the interview starts, get there early, but not too early. We suggest about 10 minutes max. But with that, I would say if you are driving a distance or you're taking some sort of public transport, I probably get there even earlier. I wouldn't walk into the firm until about 10 minutes till. Take 10 deep breaths before entering the room. It does wonders for your mental state. And then with those handshakes, wipe any slick hands off before a handshake. Nobody wants a wet handshake. During the interview, make sure you introduce yourself to everyone and continue to have that solid handshake. And we say introduce yourself to everyone because oftentimes we have found that women actually get overlooked in introductions. So try not to make that mistake and make sure you're introducing yourself to everyone. So I mentioned tablets before. Tablets are almost always a bad idea unless you're very well prepared. And when I say well prepared, you need to be able to hold your tablet away from you, be able to swipe through your content without looking. And that if you can do that and know your content well enough and do it without looking and be able to show your audience, your interviewers, then you might be able to handle it, but it's got to be to that level. Otherwise it gets as distracting. Same with, introducing yourself to everyone, make sure you're talking to interviewers. It's the same situation. If you are asked to show one project, try not to walk your interviewers through your entire portfolio. Oftentimes there's not time for that, and it also shows that you're maybe not listening. So be careful on that to listen to what interviewers request of you. And no gum, of course. This should be standard, but you'd be surprised at how many times we see people with gum. Be mindful of what you bring. Try not to overload the interviewers with lots and lots and lots of documents. It's great to see your content, but it tends to get a little cumbersome if you're bringing stacks and stacks of books and documents. Follow the lead of the interviewer. So as I mentioned before, kind of read what they're doing, listen to what they're requesting. Ask if you could talk about something in particular. Ask if they're ready to move on to something else. Don't show work until you've been asked, or just request it. And then taking notes. It's a good idea, and if you can do it where it's quick, jot the information down quickly, and it's efficient, that can work, but it's a very fine line of it being distracting and not being fully engaged in the conversation. So keep that in mind. So that was an in-person interview. Now, what we're doing now, we're doing mostly virtual interviews, so it has some different rules, and this is kind of what we've seen and what we think is important. Before the interview starts, again, don't show up too early. Check your background view. Oftentimes, it can be distracting if you don't pay attention to what's in your background. As long as it's neutral, there isn't maybe people coming in and out. Keep an eye on that. Check your technology. Practice. Do a practice interview. We're all doing things virtually, so practice with a friend or a family member so that you can check your technology, make sure all your functions work. Check your lighting, so your face isn't in the dark, or you're have a window behind you and it makes it really dark with your lighting. Know how to share your screen. That's definitely important when we're exchanging back and forth information. We might be looking at your content, but if you have something in particular you want to point out to us, it's important to know how to share your screen. And then professional attire is still applicable in this setting. Now, during the interview, pretend like you've done this before. I know that it might be, maybe it's your first, but just go with what you've got. You know what you've worked on. You know yourself, and just talk about because you know it. Have your work in front of you, and make sure it's the same content that you've given us, so that if we don't know your work, so if we're calling out a particular project, but not necessarily the name of it, you know what we're talking about, so that if interviewers have questions, you're able to follow along easily. And again, no gum here either. Make sure you're using your camera. It seems obvious, but it's important that we have that as much connection as we can in this setting. Try not to interrupt if you can help it. Sometimes with technology lags, it can affect how we have a flow of conversation unlike in a room. So just roll with it. Let's see. If technology does fail out of your control, try to have a backup plan ahead of time. Maybe a backup contact that you can connect with through email or messaging, so that you can have that connection to make sure you can either reschedule or find another avenue of having that interview. Don't read your notes. We can actually see you reading. You should be able to watch. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, you really want to know your material inside and out. It's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, I created this portfolio, I did all the work, so I know exactly what the portfolio is. But you'd be surprised at the amount of times where people have to realize they're trying to walk through a project that they worked on maybe a year ago. How much they have to go back and kind of read what it was. And so, we had mentioned earlier, pretend like you've done this before, and that kind of gets into a topic we'll get into here a little bit later. Practice makes perfect. So just make sure you've gone through your portfolio, make sure you know it, and if you can't walk someone through your portfolio that's sitting on the opposite side of a conference table and sharing it with maybe 3 different people, and that's a good indicator that you don't know your material as well as you should. So we'll kind of get into practice here in a little bit, but that all falls into that category.
Yeah, so asking questions. We have this pulled out as a separate tab because questions are really important, and we want to see people engaged and curious about the firm that they're going to potentially work for. So if you're given a tour in the office, make sure you're asking questions about the office, and always have those questions ahead of time, whether it's about the tour or just in the interview. And if you're asking a question to the whole group, like what everyone's opinion about something is, don't expect every person to answer. A lot of times it can get a bit cumbersome to have each person answer the question, especially if there's a number of people in the interview. So the last minute things to consider when you're going to have an interview, and doesn't matter if it's a virtual interview or an in-person interview, be yourself. Remember to be yourself. Show your passion, be engaging with those questions for your curiosity, show your curiosity for design and for the industry. Get your facts straight about the firm you're interviewing with. Try not to complain, about traffic or about being too busy, and don't speak badly about previous employers or peers. It's a small community. Maybe your interviewer knows them. But it also looks more poorly on you than it does the people you're talking about. I would also say be respectful of time and how much you have. Definitely ask about that. Ask how much time do we have? Do I have time to go over another project? Is that something you want to see? So really consider the time frame that you have. Practice. All interviewers will ask you kind of some basic questions. Who are you? What are you looking for? Will this company be a good fit for you? And so find a family member or a friend. There's a number of things we've suggested that do these practice interviews with them, and it'll really help running through the process. And then don't ask about pay. Oftentimes this isn't really the time to ask for it, especially in a first interview. And sometimes usually the people that are in the interview might not be the ones that you need to talk about that with anyways. And it's usually not appropriate on the first interview. And it kind of tends to be a little awkward, especially if there's multiple people in the room. But you'll find out more about that and when the best time to do that in our next series, which is in 2 weeks. So interviewing it's a two-way street, and there's things that you need to ask yourself when you get into an interview. And it's not just about what you can be or what you can do for that firm. It needs to be the right fit for you as well. And you're just as important in this process. So you need to ask yourself some really good questions about if it's a good fit for you. Is it the structure that you need? Is it the does it have the mentorship or not have the mentorship that you would like in your career? How respectful was the environment? How comfortable was the environment? How respectful were the interviewers? Were they on time? It's really important because, again, this process really is and really should be a two-way street. Sometimes we put all the focus on the firm and just getting into the firm, but if the firm isn't a right fit, then it's not necessarily the best place for you.
Yeah, and I can give a little bit of background on kind of what our culture is like with interviewing, because we've kind of just gone through a bunch of to-dos and don'ts, and you're probably thinking, wow, what a fun group this must be with this long list of stuff. So these are really just general tips. I think with all of these, there's a big caveat that you can deviate from all of these things except for gum. Gum is the one thing. You're probably surprised we bring it up so much. We've just seen it a lot. But if you can successfully kind of deviate from any of these norms and do something that is specific to you and kind of shows your character, that's great. But we just find that these are like really good kind of standards. And we like to think at CollinsWoerman that we have a pretty relaxed environment in our interviews. One thing that I really enjoy about our recruitment team is the amount of times that people have left an interview saying, man, I walked in and I saw you guys had 2 to 5 people, and sitting there waiting for me to interview. I got really nervous, but as soon as we started talking, what a relaxed group you guys are. And we've had a lot of people that seem to kind of enjoy it, as opposed to it was totally terrifying. So I really enjoy that about our team. And I think part of that is it really speaks to kind of our culture. I think we interview kind of like we work. We all collaborate, we all work with each other. There's not a lot of hierarchy at our firm, and so there's a lot of free flowing of information ideas. So we've kind of come up with a very relaxed environment for our interview settings. And And we're not trying to say that that's the right method. We're just trying to say that that's the right method for us. And I think it also helps that at CollinsWoerman, we never really are interviewing for a specific job or like a specific project. Where some firms may staff like, hey, we got a big project coming up that's going to require 3 people doing Revit drawings. We more so look for people that we think are going to be a good cultural fit and kind of have the right mentality and skill sets that thrive at CollinsWoerman. So I think that allows us to be a little bit more organic. So basically what I'm trying to say is our method is awesome, and we hope you guys have good luck using any of our tips in any sort of interviewing environment you guys have. But some may vary a little bit. But I think this is a good outline of kind of good tasks or places to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a few questions that were sent in, and we will do our best to answer these. The first question, what are standard benefits to ask about? I would say, so there's kind of some do's and don'ts to asking about benefits. I wouldn't ask about like vacation days, health care benefits, 401ks, that type of information, especially in the early interviews. But what I would ask about is like the intangible benefits of the firm. So like the work-life balance and the culture. Those I think are important benefits to ask about, and really you can really see more into the day-to-day working environment when you ask those types of questions. And then I would say some of the best interview questions would be things like, what has kept you here? These are, quite, I assume that this person is asking on, what are the best questions for you, the interviewee, to ask. So asking what has kept people here, why are they still working here, things like that. Again, that really can get into understanding the dynamics of the firm and why people want to continue in the firm. And then also another question I would say is,
Tully, can I add a couple ones that I know that I've always liked?
Yeah, for sure.
I've always liked questions along the lines of, because it shows me that you're very engaged, but good ones are, what's your work-life balance like? And hopefully people don't just say, oh, we're totally balanced. Some firms are better about trying to keep people to a 40-hour week than others. You can ask what's the expectation on, dovetail into what's the expectation of overtime and stuff like that. That's a great question, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask it. Other ones are, what kind of mentality or person thrives at your office. For us, it's somebody that can kind of hit the ground running, isn't afraid to ask questions and kind of be their own advocate. But other places might be, we want somebody that's just a super hard worker. So, that's a great question. Those two, I think, really show that, you've got something in mind that you're looking for. And I think those are two easy, good ones to throw out there.
I have one more to add. Asking, how does the firm measure success? I think that also can really lead to a lot more information about how the firm functions. And then the third question we have on here is, how have you all adapted to digital interviewing during COVID? Well, we do everything like this. It's pretty straightforward. We're all working from home still in our firm, so our online interviews are about the same. And I will say, even before COVID, we did quite a number of our interviews online. already. We were already kind of doing some of that. This has definitely pushed us to do everything in this manner, but I think it's kind of been a natural progression for us because we've had a taste of that in the last few years anyways. It also looks like we have one more question in the live Q&A. And I would say we kind of answered it. The question is, what are good questions to ask about firm culture, understanding team dynamics, expectations of overtime, project staffing, and skill expectations, etc. Andy, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's the one we were talking to. My two suggestions were really in response to that. Yeah. I think it's, it goes back to one of the earlier ones of, have a couple questions prepared. 2 or 3 is great. We've gotten some pretty long lists of questions before. Those it can get a little odd if that goes really long. Like if you got 10 questions, maybe there's a follow-up email after the interview. But I think that's good.
But it's good enthusiasm.
Yeah. I saw that it's good to follow up, but we'll or follow up with your interviewers. But it sounds like we'll be covering that in part 2 in 2 weeks.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to having you back for the next couple series.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck out there on any interviews you got coming up.